The Young and the Restless spoilers Thursdays, full episodes the 12th of March 2026. Everything in Victor's house seemed prearranged and not quite as it appeared. Patty Williams knew she would face difficulties working with Victor, but this was something she had to face. For weeks, Victor Newman's deep, resonant voice echoed in her shattered mind, a relentless, persuasive loop. "You're helping him, Patty," the Newman boss whispered, his tone dangerously, deceptively warm. "Jack isn't well. He's a danger to himself and his family. We're giving him the shelter he needs. You're his guardian angel." Initially, Patty believed the lie. Victor had sown hatred in her, and she needed to be stronger than ever. Victor had pulled her out of anonymity, manipulated her fragile psyche, and convinced her that isolating Jack was the greatest act of love. But that illusion was shattering violently and undeniably, leaving behind a horrifying reality. Patty leaned toward the reinforced door, cautiously opening the small pane of glass in the observation window just a little. She held her breath. Through the narrow gap, illuminated by the harsh, unforgiving light of a single fluorescent bulb, was Jack. He was curled up on a narrow hospital bed, and the sight was excruciatingly painful for Patty. This was not the strong, authoritative man of the Abbott family. The man on the bed was an empty ghost. Jack's skin, usually so healthy and radiant, was now gray and pale. His cheekbones protruded sharply from his face, and his breath was a hoarse, wet, wheezing sound echoing against the bare concrete walls. As Patty watched this, a violent tremor ran through Jack's body. He coughed violently, a deep, painful cough, then weakly clutched his chest, too weak to sit up. Hot tears streamed down Patty's cheeks. Asterisk, he's dying times, she realized, the thought hitting her like a blow. Asterisk, Victor isn't saving him. Victor is killing him. Asterisk, guilt like a living monster gnawed at her chest. She had been complicit. She had locked the door. She had brought him meals laced with high doses of anesthetic. She had blindly followed the bearded man's orders, terrified of what Victor would do to her if she disobeyed, but even more terrified of losing her closeness to Jack. But this wasn't closeness. This was hell on earth. If she didn't act, Jack Abbott would breathe his last in this concrete grave, and his blood would be on her hands. Patty hastily closed the observation window and stepped back, her heart pounding like a bird trapped in its cage. She had to do something. She had to send a signal, a desperate cry for help to the outside world. But how Victor's security system was impenetrable. There were cameras at every intersection, and burly, silent guards with earpieces were stationed at the exits. She had no phone, no internet access, and every move she made was monitored by Victor's ruthless head of security. Returning to her modest private room at the end of the hallway, Patty paced back and forth in the small room, her mind racing. She needed a container, something that could carry the message out of this fortress without arousing suspicion from the guards. Her eyes scanned the room, finally settling on a small, polished wooden box on the dressing table. It contained personal belongings confiscated from Jack when Victor's men first ambushed him. A gold coin clip, a silk pocket square, a luxury watch, and an old, tarnished silver Zippo lighter. Patty approached the box and picked up the lighter. It was heavy, cool to the touch, and deeply engraved with the Abbott family crest. Jack had quit smoking decades ago, but she knew he always carried this lighter. It was a precious family heirloom, part of his father, John Abbott, which he always kept in his breast pocket as a talisman. If this lighter somehow returned to the Abbott mansion, Diane or Kyle would immediately know something was wrong. Jack would never willingly part with it. A flicker of desperate ingenuity shone in Patty's eyes. She hurried to her small writing desk, pulled out a drawer to retrieve a pen and a small piece of parchment from a notebook. She had to be clever. She couldn't write a simple message. If Victor's men intercepted it, they would execute her and Jack's fate would be sealed. It had to be a code, a secret symbol, understood only by the Abbott family, but to a Newman thug, it would look like meaningless scribbles. With shaking hands, Patty pressed the pen to the paper. First, she drew a small, crude outline of a black cat. It was her signature, her eternal motif. Asterisk, Kitty. Asterisk, Diane Jenkins. knew all about Patty's obsession with cats. It would immediately identify the sender. Next to the cat, she drew a massive, jagged, aggressive letter, V. The V was drawn with heavy, dark strokes, looming over a broken, fragile letter, J. Finally, beneath the letters, she sketched a simple hourglass, but all the sand was piled at the very bottom. Time was up. She stared at the tiny drawing. Asterisk, black cat. V crushing J. Time is out. Asterisk. It was a frantic, terrifying plea. Patty carefully rolled the tiny scrap of paper between her thumb and forefinger until it was a cylinder no thicker than a needle. She picked up the silver Zippo, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped it. Grasping the top of the lighter, she pulled the internal fluid chamber out of the silver casing. Using the tip of her pen, she lifted the thick cotton padding at the bottom of the chamber, wedged the tightly rolled paper deep inside, and pressed the cotton back down. She slid the insert back into the silver casing. It snapped shut with a satisfying metallic times clink asterisk. The vessel was ready. Now she just needed the opportunity. Salvation wrapped in supreme danger arrived an hour later in the form of Griggs Victor's stone-faced head of security. He knocked sharply once before entering Patty's room carrying a large empty canvas garment bag. Pack up the rest of Abbott's tailored suits and his personal effects, Griggs barked, tossing the bag onto her bed. Mr. Newman wants a trail laid. We're sending a trunk of his belongings to a high-end hotel in Chicago under one of Abbott's known aliases, and then having the hotel forward it to his family in Genoa City. It'll look like he went on a bender, dumped his stuff, and skipped the country. Patty's breath caught, but she forced her face into a mask of blank, obedient compliance. Yes, Mr. Griggs, of course, I'll pack them right away. Make it quick. The courier leaves in 10 minutes, Griggs said, turning his back to check a message on his encrypted smartphone. This was it. The window was impossibly narrow. Patty moved to the closet where Jack's pristine suits hung useless and mocking in this bleak prison. She pulled down a custom Italian wool blazer, Jack's favorite navy blue one. As she folded it to place it into the canvas bag, she palmed the silver Zippo from her pocket. Her heart roared in her ears, a deafening drumbeat of terror. If Griggs turned around, if he saw her, the consequences flashed before her eyes, a shallow grave in the woods, Jack left to rot. With a swift practice movement born of pure desperation, Patty slid her hand into the breast pocket of the navy blazer and pushed the heavy silver lighter deep into the silk lining. She smoothed the fabric over, folding the jacket and placing it gently into the bag, right as Griggs turned back around. Done, he grunted, eyeing her suspiciously. All packed, Mr. Griggs, Patty said, offering a vacant, innocent smile that cost her every ounce of her remaining strength. Just his clothes, nothing else. Griggs zipped the bag shut with a harsh tearing sound, grabbed it by the handles, and marched out of the room. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind him, the lock engaging with a heavy thud. Patty collapsed to her knees on the cold linoleum floor, burying her face in her hands. She wept, silently praying to whatever God was listening that her desperate gamble would pay off. Asterisk. Find at times she begged the universe. Asterisk. Please, Diane. Please, Kyle. Find it before it's too late. Asterisk. Hundreds of miles away, the atmosphere inside the sprawling Abbott mansion was suffocating. The grand living room, usually a beacon of warmth and familial laughter, felt like a mausoleum. Diane Jenkins stood by the French doors, staring out at the manicured lawns of the estate, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. She held a crystal tumbler of bourbon that she hadn't taken a sip from in an hour. Behind her, the front door opened and Kyle Abbott strode in. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, and the dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and dead ends. Anything, Diane asked, turning around, her voice barely a whisper. Kyle shook his head, throwing his briefcase onto the sofa in frustration. Nothing. The private investigators have scoured the entire eastern seaboard. Dad's credit cards haven't been touched. His passport hasn't been flagged. It's like he just vanished into thin air, Mom. People don't just disappear. Your father wouldn't do this, Diane said fiercely, her grip tightening on her glass. He wouldn't abandon us. He wouldn't abandon Jabot. Someone took him, Kyle. I feel it in my bones. Before Kyle could respond, the chiming of the doorbell echoed through the silent house. Mrs. Martinez, the housekeeper, hurried to answer it, returning a moment later carrying a large sealed cardboard box. A courier just dropped this off. Mr. Kyle, Mrs. Martinez, said, her brow furrowed. It requires a signature. It says it's from the concierge at the Drake Hotel in Chicago. Kyle frowned, signing the digital pad and taking the box. He carried it to the mahogany coffee table, pulling a pocket knife from his trousers to slice through the heavy packing tape. Diane moved closer, a sense of deep unease settling in her stomach. Kyle opened the flaps of the box. Inside lay a canvas garment bag and a typed letter from the hotel management stating that these items had been left in a suite booked under the name John Abbott and were being returned to his permanent residence as per hotel policy. Chicago, Kyle muttered, unzipping the garment bag. Dad hasn't been to Chicago in months. He pulled out a navy blue Italian wool blazer. Diane gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's his. He was wearing that the morning he went missing. Kyle's face hardened. He began to systematically check the pockets of the blazer, a habit ingrained in him since childhood whenever he borrowed his father's clothes. His hand slipped into the breast pocket and his fingers brushed against cold, heavy metal. He pulled it out. The tarnished silver Zippo lighter gleamed dully under the chandelier light. His lighter, Kyle said, his voice thick with confusion. Grandpa John's lighter. Diane stepped forward, her eyes locked on the silver object. Jack never goes anywhere without that. He considers it his lucky charm. He would never leave it behind in a hotel room, Kyle. Never. Kyle turned the lighter over in his hands. He flicked the lid open. The familiar metallic clink times was muffled, sounding wrong. He ran his thumb over the flint wheel, but it wouldn't strike. The wheel was jammed tight. It's broken, Kyle noted, frowning. He gripped the chimney of the lighter and pulled, firmly sliding the internal insert out of the silver casing to check the fluid level. As the insert came free, a tiny, tightly rolled piece of paper dislodged from the bottom cotton padding and fluttered down onto the glass surface of the coffee table. Silence descended on the room. Diane and Kyle stared at the tiny cylinder of paper. What is that? Diane whispered, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. Kyle set the lighter down and carefully picked up the paper. With agonizing slowness, he unrolled it, flattening the tiny creased edges against the table. Diane leaned over his shoulder, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the crude, frantic drawing. Is that a cat? Kyle asked, squinting at the dark ink. Diane's blood ran ice cold. A horrifying jolt of recognition struck her like lightning. A black cat, she breathed, her voice trembling. Kyle, that's Patty Williams. She used to draw those all the time. It was her obsession, her signature. Kyle looked up at his mother, utter bewilderment etched on his face. Patty Williams. What does Paul's crazy sister have to do with Dad's lighter? Look closer, Diane commanded, her survival instincts kicking into high gear. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the rest of the drawing. The cat is next to this massive V, and the V is crushing a J. Kyle's eyes widened as he traced the aggressive lines of the V. He looked at the shattered J beneath it. Then his eyes moved to the bottom of the paper. An hourglass. With all the sand at the bottom, the puzzle pieces, sharp and jagged, violently snapped together in Diane's mind. The realization was so horrifying, so monumental, that she had to grip the edge of the sofa to keep her knees from buckling. Diane whispered the letter, tasting like venom on her tongue. Victor. Kyle stood up abruptly, knocking the coffee table with his shins. Victor Newman. You think Victor took Dad? Think about it, Kyle. Diane's voice rose, vibrating with a mixture of terror and absolute fury. Victor has been trying to destroy Jabot, trying to destroy your father for decades. He disappears without a trace. A fake trail is laid in Chicago, and now we get a distress signal hidden inside Jack's most prized possession, signed by a woman who is famously unstable and easily manipulated. Diane paced the room, her mind working at 1,000 miles a minute. Victor must have Patty. He's using her. He probably manipulated her into helping him keep Jack locked away somewhere. But Patty loves Jack. In her own deeply disturbed way, she loves him. She must have realized what Victor is doing. Kyle looked back down at the drawing, his gaze fixated on the hourglass. The hourglass. Mom, time is running out. Dad's health. Kyle's voice broke. Dad has a heart condition. If Victor is keeping him locked up, depriving him of his medication, he's dying. Diane finished the sentence, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Patty is watching him deteriorate. She's terrified. She snuck this lighter into his belongings, hoping it would get to us. She's begging us for help. A dangerous, explosive anger ignited in Kyle's eyes. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a lethal, white-hot rage. He grabbed his keys from the console table. I'm going to the ranch. I'm going to tear Victor Newman limb from limb until he tells me where my father is. Stop, Diane lunged forward, grabbing Kyle's arm with a grip like a steel vise. Are you out of your mind? If you storm the Newman Ranch half-cocked, Victor will deny everything. He'll call security, have you arrested for trespassing, and the second you leave in handcuffs, he will make a phone call. Diane stepped in front of her son, her eyes blazing with a fierce maternal ferocity. If Victor knows we are onto him, he will move Jack. Or worse, Kyle. He will dispose of him. And he will kill Patty for betraying him. We are dealing with a ruthless monster who operates above the law. We cannot just kick down his door. Kyle breathed heavily, his chest heaving, as he fought to control his fury. Then what do we do, Mom? We can't go to the police. Chance might be a good guy, but Victor has half the GCPD in his pocket. If a leak happens, Dad is dead. We do this smartly, we do this quietly, Diane said, her voice dropping to a low lethal register. She walked back to the coffee table and picked up the tiny scrap of paper, holding it like a sacred relic. Patty just handed us the key, but we have to pick the lock ourselves. We have the delivery details from the courier. We have the fake hotel trail. We have Jabot's security team and unlimited resources. Diane looked up at Kyle, the former architect of her own ruthless schemes, now fully channeling her cunning into saving the man she loved. We are going to track exactly where this box originated from. We are going to find Victor's black site. We are going to orchestrate a rescue mission so precise and so devastating that Victor won't even know what hit him until Jack is already home. Kyle nodded slowly, the reckless anger solidifying into a cold, calculated determination. And Patty, we save her too, Diane stated firmly, surprising even herself. She had a long, ugly history with Patty Williams, but that didn't matter now. She risked her life to send us this. If Victor finds out, he will destroy her without a second thought. We need to secure her immunity, get her out of there, and get her the psychiatric help she actually needs, far away from Victor's poisonous reach. Diane poured the glass of bourbon she had ignored earlier down her throat in one swift motion, the liquid burning a trail of fire down her chest. She slammed the crystal glass onto the table. Victor Newman thinks he is a god in this town, Diane said, her eyes flashing with the promise of war. He thinks he can play with people's lives, lock them in cages and pull their strings. But he made a mistake. He underestimated Patty and he underestimated us. Kyle pulled his phone from his pocket, already dialing the number of their most trusted off-the-books security contractor. Let's go get Dad.